On March 9th, a reporter asked Donald Trump whether the Iranian government had activated sleeper cells in the United States. Trump said, "They've been trying for a long time, and we have been very much on top of it. We're watching every single one of them. We know a lot about them." He said something else in that answer that the mainstream press buried in the fourth paragraph if they mentioned it at all. He said the Democrat-led shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security was impeding his administration's efforts to address those concerns. Now read those closed captions back slowly. While American forces are fighting and dying in Iran, while Operation Epic Fury is active, while 6 Americans have already lost their lives, while the FBI and the DHS are on a war footing tracking encrypted Iranian communications that may serve as operational triggers for assets already inside this country, the Democrats shut down the Department of Homeland Security. And the president said that shutdown is making it harder to track people who want to kill us on our own soil. ABC News reviewed a federal government alert sent to law enforcement agencies and reported that the United States has intercepted encrypted communications believed to have originated in Iran that may serve as an operational trigger for sleeper assets outside the country. Sleeper assets. That's the language of the federal government's own alert to its own law enforcement agencies. People already here, already positioned, waiting for the signal. The Iranian regime has been running assassination plots and terrorist operations on American soil for at least 46 years now. In 2024, before the war even started, a federal jury convicted an Iranian operative named Asif Reza Merchant of participating in a plot to assassinate Donald Trump. There were plots against John Bolton. There were plots against Iranian dissidents on American soil. The regime convicted last year of plotting to kill the president of the United States is the same regime whose encrypted communications are now being intercepted as a potential activation signals for the assets already positioned inside America. And tonight, I want to do something this show has been building toward across many episodes. I want to connect the dots. I want to show you that the threat that we face right now from Iran and its networks inside this country didn't arrive by accident. It arrived through a series of deliberate policy choices on the border, on vetting, on law enforcement, on our schools, on our families, on the rights that are the last line of defense for every American citizen when the government cannot or will not protect them. And I want to show you that every single right that stands between us and the worst possible outcome of this moment is a right the left has been working on to take away.
Courage, compassion, faith, freedom, truth. Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to Awaken America.
Let's start with what we know. Documented and on the record, because the foundation of everything that follows has to be facts that can't be argued away. The Iranian regime's history of terrorist operations on American soil is not a theory. It's a documented, prosecuted, convicted record spanning nearly 5 decades. The seizure of the American embassy in Tehran in 1979 was the opening act of a war that the Iranian regime has been fighting against the United States ever since. It's a war that America kept trying to end through diplomacy, while Iran kept prosecuting through terrorism, proxy warfare, and assassination plots. Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy force that killed 241 American Marines in 1983, the Beirut barracks bombing. Iranian proxies killed American soldiers in Iraq and Syria across multiple administrations. The IRGC's Qud force, commanded by Qasem Soleimani until his killing in 2020, ran external operations targeting Americans on multiple continents for decades. This ain't ancient history. This is the operational record of the regime whose encrypted communications are now being intercepted as potential activation signals for people already inside the United States. In 2024, the Trump assassination plot convicted Asif Raza Merchant. That's particularly significant because of its timing. That plot was planned and prosecuted before Operation Epic Fury began. Before the war, the regime was already running active assassination operations on American soil against the sitting president of the United States, while Biden administration was still trying to negotiate a return to the nuclear deal. That is the adversary that we're dealing with. It's not a government that responds to military action with military action and then negotiates. A government that runs assassination plots against American political leaders as a standing operational posture, wartime or not. Now, let's add in the border. Between January 2021 and January of 2025, the Biden administration oversaw the entry of an estimated 8 to 10 million people in the United States through a combination of legal ports of entry and humanitarian parole programs and illegal crossings. The vetting infrastructure that exists to screen those entries, the databases, the intelligence sharing, the background check systems, was overwhelmed by the volume. Not broken by malice in every case, though policy choices contributed significantly to the breakdown. Overwhelmed by sheer numbers that the system was never designed to process at that scale and speed. The specific vetting failure that matters most for the Iranian threat is ideological screening. The United States intelligence community has known for decades that Iran's external operations don't rely exclusively on Iranian nationals. They rely on the network of ideological aligned assets recruited across multiple nationalities, ethnicities, and immigration pathways. The Austin shooting on March 1st of this year, which I'm pretty sure I covered in detail in my Fire Next Time episode, may have been a subscriber only episode. It involved, and I'm going to butcher his name again because I don't know how to pronounce any of these. Ndiaga Diagna. Anyway, a naturalized citizen who arrived on a tourist visa in 2000. And he received citizenship in 2013. He was wearing an Iranian flag undershirt and a hoodie that said "Property of Allah" when he opened fire on a bar on 6th Street, killing 3 people and wounding 14. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force confirmed publicly that they were investigating a potential terrorism nexus. This wasn't an Iranian national who crossed the southern border last year. This was a man who had been inside the United States for 25 years. He became a citizen through the legal naturalization process and was apparently radicalized to the point of conducting what looks like a terror attack while displaying Iranian regime symbols. The Gracie Mansion IED attack on March 7th involved 2 Pennsylvania-born teenagers, Amir Bolat and Ibrahim Kiyumi. They told the FBI that they'd watched ISIS videos and through TATP-based explosive devices packed with metal shrapnel at the crowd outside at what's his name there? Mamdani, the mayor of New York City's house. They were born in Pennsylvania, radicalized by online content, activated by whatever combination of ideology, grievance, and operational instruction produced the decision to build and throw bombs at American civilians. Neither of those attacks was carried out by someone who crossed the southern border recently. But here's what the border matters for. The scale of unvetted entry over the past 4 years means that among the millions of people who came through, some of them are from countries and through networks with documented connections to Iranian proxy operations and Islamist radicalization infrastructure. The intelligence community doesn't have a complete picture of who's here, what their connections are, and whether they're among the sleeper assets the intercepted Iranian communications are designed to activate. That uncertainty is not a minor administrative gap. It's a national security crisis created by deliberate policy choices that the Biden administration made and the Democratic Party defended at every step. Trump said the Democrat-led DHS shutdown is impeding the administration's ability to track these threats. The DHS shutdown primarily affected FEMA, TSA, and Customs and Border Protection. The agencies most directly responsible for the border infrastructure that screens entries and transportation security infrastructure that monitors domestic movement. Cutting those agencies during a period of active war with Iran and credible intelligence about activated sleeper assets is not a budget dispute. It's a choice. The Democrats made it. They own the consequences. The FBI has no comment on Trump's sleeper cell remarks, per their statement to the USA Today. DHS didn't respond to press inquiries. The administration isn't going to brief the public on the operational details of what they're tracking, nor should they. As this show argued in my Iran War Powers episode, publicizing operational security details during active conflict serves the adversary and not the public. What the public is entitled to know is that the threat is real. The president has confirmed it. The intelligence intercepts support it. And the Democrats have spent 4 years building the conditions that make it as dangerous as it is. I want you to hold in your mind everything from part 1 of what I talked about. The sleeper assets, the intercepted communications, the 46-year record of Iranian operations on American soil, the vetting gaps created by 4 years of open border policy. And I want you to ask yourself one question. If the government's ability to protect you from an activated threat inside your own community is imperfect, incomplete, or temporarily compromised by a Democrat-engineered funding shutdown, what's left between you and whatever walks through the door? The Second Amendment, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, which shall not be infringed. That sentence, that right, the one the founders placed second in the Bill of Rights, right after free speech and before everything else, because they understood that an armed citizenry is the foundational guarantee of every other right on the list. You can silence speech by force. You can dissolve assemblies by force. You can ignore petitions. But an armed population retains the physical capacity to resist tyranny and to defend itself when the institutions designed to protect it fail or are prevented from functioning. America is the most heavily armed civilian population in the world. There are more guns in private hands in this country than there are people. That fact makes the American left physically uncomfortable in a way that reveals exactly what they fear. Not gun violence, which they claim is their concern, but the distributed, decentralized, ungovernable defense capability of a free people who have not surrendered their ability to resist. An unarmed population is manageable. An armed population is not. That distinction is why the Second Amendment exists and why its enemies are so persistent in their efforts to erode it. The Democrats have fought the Second Amendment on every available front. Red flag laws that allow the government to confiscate a citizen's firearms based on a complaint before any adjudication of wrongdoing. due process suspended for the specific right the founders considered foundational. Universal background check proposals designed less to screen dangerous individuals than to build the federal database of gun ownership that is the prerequisite for any future confiscation program. Bans on so-called assault weapons, a term with no precise legal or mechanical definition, designed to target the class of firearms that are most militarily relevant for exactly the scenario that we're discussing right now. Magazine capacity restrictions, storage requirement designed to make defense use impractical, death by 1,000 regulatory cuts. Each one presented as a reasonable common sense measure. Each one a step toward the disarmed population that the progressive project requires. During the China virus lockdowns, Democrat governors in multiple states declared gun stores non-essential businesses and ordered them closed, while simultaneously releasing prisoners from jails to reduce China virus exposure risk. They released the criminals. They locked the gun stores. The prioritization in that sequence was not accidental. It told you exactly who the progressive governing philosophy regards as deserving of protection and who it regards as a population to be managed. Right now, today, with intercepted Iranian communications suggesting activation signals for sleeper assets in the United States, with the DHS partially hobbled by Democrat engineered funding politics, with the FBI tracking threats it won't discuss publicly. The armed American citizen is not a paranoid prepper fantasy. The armed American citizen is the practical reality of self-defense in a country where law enforcement can't be everywhere, where response times in rural communities like mine can be 20 minutes or more, and where a radicalized individual acting on an encrypted signal can move from decision to action faster than any institutional response can intercept them. The Austin shooting happened on 6th Street at 2 in the morning. That guy opened fired in a crowded entertainment district. 3 people died, 14 were wounded. The police responded, and the shooting ended. But it ended after the shooting happened, after the bodies were on the ground, after the 14 people were in the hospital. The Second Amendment's role in that scenario is not the fantasy of a gun-toting vigilante magically stopping every attack before it starts. It's the reality that in a country where 46% of the adults live in a household with a firearm, a person contemplating a mass casualty attack must calculate that they may face armed resistance from their intended victims. That calculation changes behavior. It doesn't eliminate evil. It raises the cost of evil in ways that matter. God gave you the instinct to protect your family. The founders gave you the constitutional right to act on that instinct. And the Democrats are working every day to take that right away. In the current moment, with the current threat, that effort is not a policy disagreement. It's a betrayal of every American family that's supposed to be defended by the institutions those same Democrats are undermining. The open border was not an oversight. It was a policy implemented deliberately, defended aggressively, sustained for 4 years against legal challenges, congressional opposition, and the documented evidence of its consequences. The people who built it knew what they were building. The question this episode asks is why? Start with the numbers, because the numbers are the argument. In the 4 years of the Biden administration, Border Patrol recorded more than 8 million encounters at the southern border. That figure doesn't include the estimated 600,000 or more gotaways, people who crossed without being encountered at all and whose identities, nationalities, and intentions are entirely unknown to any federal agency. The vetting systems that exist to screen legal entries were not designed for that volume and were further compromised by policy decisions that prioritized processing speed over screening rigor. That created humanitarian parole pathways with minimal background check requirements, and that dismantled the agreements with Mexico and Central American countries that had reduced border crossings to manageable levels under the Trump administration's first term. The specific vetting failure that matters for the Iranian threat picture is the collapse of ideological and national security screening. The visa vetting system, the asylum screening system, and the naturalization process all contain national security checkpoints designed to identify individuals with connections to terrorist organizations, foreign intelligence services, and hostile foreign governments. Those checkpoints work reasonably well when the volumes of applications is manageable and the intelligence databases they check against are current and comprehensive. When the volume becomes 8 million encounters in 4 years, when processing targets are set by political pressure rather than security capacity, and when the intelligence sharing infrastructure between DHS, the FBI, and the intelligence community is strained by the same political dynamics that produced the open border policy in the first place, the checkpoints become unreliable. The Iranian threat picture specifically requires thinking about ideological radicalization networks rather than just Iranian nationals. Iran's external operations have historically used a global network of ideological aligned assets. People recruited through mosques, through online radicalization pipelines, through community networks associated with Iranian proxy organizations who hold citizenship or legal status in Western countries and can therefore travel, operate, and position themselves without triggering the national security flags that Iranian nationals would trigger. The Austin shooter was a Senegalese born American citizen. The Gracie Mansion attackers were Pennsylvanian born teenagers. Neither entered the country recently. Both were apparently radicalized through ideological networks that exist inside the United States. Networks whose reach into immigrant communities and online spaces expanded during the same period that the border was open and the vetting infrastructure was overwhelmed. The Democrat policy response to every piece of this evidence has been the same. Deny the connection, attack the messenger, call the concern racist, and continue the policy. When Republican governors abused migrants to Democrat-run cities to make the consequences of the open border visible to the political class that was insulated from those consequences, Democrat mayors declared emergencies and demanded federal money while continuing to oppose border enforcement. When the Trump administration moved to reinstate immigration enforcement after taking office, Democrats at every level of government, through sanctuary city policies, through state laws prohibiting law enforcement cooperation with ICE, through the green light law in New York that prohibited sharing DMV data with federal immigration authorities, built a legal and administrative wall between federal enforcement and the information it needed to identify and remove people who shouldn't be here. The show covered the New York green light law and my Albany's War on New York episode. The year before that law took effect, ICE had used New York DMV data to arrest 149 child predators, rescue 105 human trafficking victims, arrest 230 gang members, and seize more than 6,400 pounds of narcotics. After the green light law passed, that information flow was cut off. The same Democrat legislature that cut off ICE's access to child predator and trafficking victim data is the same political movement that shut down the Department of Homeland Security, while Iranian sleeper assets are potentially being activated inside the country. The pattern is consistent enough that it demands an explanation beyond incompetence. The explanation this show offers is not that every Democrat politician consciously wants Americans to be killed by Iranian sleeper cells. The explanation is that the progressive political project has been so thoroughly captured by an ideology that views American sovereignty, American borders, American law enforcement, and the American military power as primary threats to global justice that its practitioners have built a policy architecture that systematically undermines every institutional capacity that stands between the American people and the enemies of this country. And they've done it so consistently, predictably, and without meaningful accountability for the consequences. The outcome is indistinguishable from deliberate sabotage, whether it's driven by ideology, by foreign influence, by political calculation, or by some combination of all three, is a question that history will answer. What is not a question is the outcome. 6 Americans are dead in Iran. 3 Americans are dead on 6th Street in Austin. The DHS is hobbled. The border was open for 4 years. And the Democrats are filing war power resolutions to constrain the military operation that's trying to end the regime that caused all of it. Now I'm going to connect two things that the mainstream press treats as entirely separate stories. The progressive agenda against the American family, against parental rights, against the biological reality of sex, against the traditional formation of boys into men, and the national security crisis we're living through right now. They're not separate stories. They're the same story told from different angles. Start with what happened to gender medicine. For decades, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, the authoritative reference of the American psychiatric profession, classified gender identity disorder as a diagnosable mental health condition. That classification reflected clinical reality. A small number of people experience significant, persistent distress about the relationship between their biological sex and their sense of self. And that distress is real, requires professional treatment, and has documented psychological roots that respond to proper therapeutic intervention. In 2013, the publication of DSM-5, that classification was eliminated. Gender identity disorder was replaced with gender dysphoria, a change that shifted the clinical frame from the identity confusion itself to only the distress some people experience as a result. The diagnostic category was narrowed and softened in ways that made it easier to present gender transition as a response to a mental health condition, but as a normal variation of human experience requiring affirmation rather than treatment. That change did not happen because the clinical evidence demanded it. It happened because activist pressure on the American Psychiatric Association produced it. The same ideological movement that has captured universities, school curricula, corporate HR departments, and the Democratic Party applied that same pressure to the medical credentialing bodies that define what is and is not a mental illness. And they got the outcome that they wanted. The classification was changed. The clinical frame was shifted, and the downstream consequences of that shift have been playing out in schools, in pediatric clinics, and in the lives of children and families across the country ever since. Here's what that shift produced in practice. School counselors, the same profession this show covered when I documented the Olentangy High School counselor who participated in the anti-ICE walkout, are operating in an institutional environment that has told them affirming of a child's stated gender identity is the clinically appropriate response to gender-related distress. And that questioning that identity or exploring the underlying psychological causes of the distress is harmful. Under that framework, a 12-year-old girl who has experienced trauma, who is struggling, who is in pain, who is expressing that pain through confusion about her identity, isn't a child who needs careful, sustained therapeutic work to process what happened to her and build a stable sense of self. She's a child who is told that her trauma-induced confusion might mean she is in the wrong body. That there's a medical pathway available to address that. And that her parents' concerns about that pathway are obstacles to her well-being rather than expressions of parental love and appropriate caution. It's not a hypothetical. It's what happened to a 12-year-old girl whose family we know. School counselors told her that her traumatic experiences were a sign that she should change her identity. Instead of real counseling she needed, the kind that would have helped her process her trauma, develop the coping skills that she needs, and build resilience, she was put on a medical pathway that told her the problem was her body, not her trauma. Children cannot consent to the long-term consequences of hormonal intervention. Their brains are not developmentally equipped to understand what they're agreeing to. And the adults who should be protecting them, parents, counselors, physicians operating within an ethical framework, have been systematically disempowered by an ideology that treats parental authority as a threat to the child rather than the child's primary protection. The Democrats have fought every legislative attempt to restore parental rights in this area. They've opposed bills requiring parental notification when schools affirm a child's gender identity change. They have opposed bills restricting hormonal interventions for minors. They've called every such bill an attack on transgender children, using the children as a shield for a medical and ideological project that the children themselves can't evaluate and from which many of them will spend the rest of their lives recovering. Now connect this to the national security picture. A civilization defends itself through the strength of its men and the stability of its families. That's not a conservative talking point. It's the historical record of every civilization that's ever survived an external threat. Strong men, formed in faith and in the knowledge of what they are and what they're called to defend, are the human infrastructure of national security. The family, father, mother, children raised in a stable home with a clear understanding of their identity and their obligations, is the foundational unit of the society those men are defending. The Progressive Project has been attacking both for decades. It's told boys that masculinity is toxic, that their natural instincts towards strength and protection are pathologies to be medicated and socialized away. It's told girls that their bodies are changeable and their identities are fluid. It's told children that their parents cannot be trusted and that the school and the state know better. And it's done all of this while simultaneously defunding the police, opening the border, hamstringing immigration enforcement, and filing war powers resolutions to constrain the military operation defending the country those weakened men and destabilized families are supposed to inhabit. God created man and woman. He created them with different natures, different strengths, different roles in the architecture of a family and a civilization. You can be gay. You can be bisexual. God made you who you are, and you will answer to Him for your life as every single one of us will. But you can't change the biological reality of what you were created to be. A child told that she can be remade into something different than what God created her to be is not being liberated. She's being lied to. And that lie is doing the work of every enemy this country has ever faced. The work of dissolving from the inside the human strength and family stability that external enemies cannot destroy from the outside. The last two rights that I'm going to examine in this episode are connected by the same underlying logic as everything before them. The Progressive Project requires control of the next generation. And the two most powerful forces standing between the left and that control are parental choice in education and the existence of the children themselves. Start with school choice. I've covered the school system on this show extensively. The Hermantown ICE curriculum that told 8th graders federal law enforcement agents are kidnappers. The Fort Bragg kindergarten classrooms where a teacher wore fetish accessories and told 5-year-olds about turning into a werewolf. The Loudoun County locker room case. The Utah compelled speech bill, the Ohio counselor at the anti-ICE walkout. Every one of those stories came from the same institutional environment, the public school system as it currently operates in the majority of American jurisdictions. Captured by a teaching culture and an administrative framework that has redefined the purpose of education from the formation of minds and the transmission of knowledge to the ideological reshaping of children's identities, beliefs, and political commitments. School choice is the mechanism by which parents can remove their children from that environment without surrendering the public funding that is supposed to serve those children's education. When a parent can take the per pupil funding allocated to their child and direct it to a private school, a religious school, a classical academy, or a home education program, they are exercising the most fundamental form of consumer accountability available in any market. They are taking their business elsewhere. The public school system loses the student and the funding. The alternative that better serves the family's values gains both. And the competitive pressure that creates is the only force that has ever reliably improved the quality of government-run services. The Democrats have opposed school choice at every turn because it understands exactly what it represents. Every child who leaves the public school system takes with them the daily influence of the institutional framework the left has spent decades building. The progressive projects, investment in teacher training programs, curricular frameworks, counselor certification requirements, and administrative hiring pipelines is an investment in the captive audience of compulsory public education. School choice dissolves that captivity. It gives parents the power to opt out, and an ideology that depends on controlling the formation of the next generation cannot survive a large-scale parental opt-out. The Kids in Classes Act that Senator Tim Scott introduced, which I covered in detail before, is one piece of this. The broader school choice movement, which has been gaining ground in Republican-governed states with education savings account programs and voucher systems, is the structural response to what the public school system has become. Parents are fleeing the system, as Nicole Neely of Defending Education said, in droves. They're making the rational calculation that the institution designed to educate their children has been converted into an instrument for reshaping those children in ways the parents would never choose if they had any choice. The left calls this a threat to public education. It is a threat to the left's control of public education, which is an entirely different thing, and the only thing that they're actually defending. Now, connect this to abortion. The left's defense of abortion on demand as a fundamental right is presented as a matter of women's health, reproductive freedom, and bodily autonomy. This show does not accept that framing because it's built on a premise that the science does not support and that faith flatly rejects. Life begins at conception. That's not a religious assertion imposed on secular medicine. It's the biological reality that every embryology textbook affirms and that every honest physician knows. The entity formed at conception is a human life. Ending it is ending a human life. The question of whether that ending is justified under any circumstance is a question that reasonable people of faith and philosophy have debated. But the question of what is being ended is not genuinely contested by anyone who is being honest with the science. Since Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973, more than 63 million abortions have been performed in the United States. 63 million human lives ended. The left calls this healthcare. The left calls the people who oppose it extremists. The left has fought every restriction, every waiting period, every parental notification requirement, every informed consent law, every heartbeat bill as an attack on women's rights. And simultaneously, the left opened the border to millions of unvetted entries, defunded the police, hamstrung immigration enforcement, undermined the military, attacked the Second Amendment, captured the school system, and lobbied for the activation of the next generation's pharmaceutical gender transition. Every arrow points in the same direction. Every policy either reduces the number of Americans being born, weakens the ones who are born, or replaces the ones who were never born with a population that entered through a border that was deliberately left open. The babies who were never born are not here to be taught in our schools, to grow up in our families, to serve in our military, to defend this country in the moment we're living through right now. 63 million of them. The generation the left aborted would be between 0 and 53 years old today. The soldiers, the parents, the workers, the citizens who were never given the chance to be any of those things. The left calls abortion freedom. We call it what it is: the deliberate erasure of the generation that was supposed to be here. This is the stakes of the fight. It's not about politics. It's not about party. It is about whether the civilization that was built on faith, on family, on the God-given rights of free people, on the extraordinary experiment of American self-governance, whether that civilization will exist for the children who are alive right now to inherit and defend. Every right this episode is discussed: the Second Amendment, the border, parental rights and education, the right to life, is a right that is necessary for the survival of the thing we're trying to hand to the next generation. And the left is fighting every single one of them. Let me bring this together the way it needs to be brought together, because the connections are the point, and the point is urgent. Iran has sleeper assets inside the United States. The president has confirmed it. The intelligence intercepts support it. The FBI is on a war footing. The Iranian regime has been plotting assassinations on American soil for 46 years. and convicted an operative for plotting to kill Trump just a couple years ago. Operation Epic Fury is active. 6 Americans are dead, and the Democrats shut down the Department of Homeland Security and filed war powers resolutions to constrain the military operation defending this country. The border was open for 4 years. 8 million documented encounters with hundreds of thousands of gotaways passed through a vetting infrastructure that was overwhelmed by deliberate policy choices. The people response for those choices defended them at every step and called the people who raised security concerns racist. The ideological radicalization networks that produced the Austin shooter and the Gracie Mansion bomb throwers exist inside the country. They were not imported across the southern border last year. They were cultivated over years in communities and online spaces whose reach expanded while institutions designed to monitor and disrupt them were defunded, hamstrung, and politically attacked. The Second Amendment stands between every American family and whatever the government cannot or will not protect them from. The Democrats are trying to take it. The school system is trying to take the next generation. The abortion industry has already taken 63 million lives. The gender ideology apparatus is in the schools, in the pediatric clinics, in the counselors' offices, telling traumatized children that their trauma is a sign they were born in the wrong body, and that the solution is a pharmaceutical and surgical pathway their parents can't stop. All of it is connected. All of it points in the same direction. The civilization that free people built on this continent under God, with the Bible as its moral foundation and the Constitution as its legal framework, is being dismantled from within while it faces a genuine external threat that's not theoretical, not political, not the invention of partisan media. It's real. The intercepts are real. The dead Americans are real. The sleeper assets are real. What is also real is this: the American people are not unarmed. They're not unaware. They're not going quietly. The elections of 2024 produced the clearest popular mandate in a generation for the agenda that this show represents: secure borders, strong families, parental rights, the right to life, the Second Amendment, and the military strength to defeat the enemies of this country on their own soil rather than on ours. The mandate is real. The fight is real. And the outcome depends on whether the people who understand what is at stake are willing to stay engaged, stay vocal, stay armed with truth and with the constitutional rights that the left is trying to strip away before we can use them. We are. This show is. And every person listening to this right now is part of that. Stand with us, support the mission, refuse the silence. Find us at tittdusa.com and the Stand Against the Silence campaign. And I'll see you next time.